like to welcome NIcanor Perlas to our third meetup for NetworkM. NIcanor is the co-founder and co-sponsor of the PAG-ASA, which is a natural, spiritual, cultural movement active in creating a better Philippines. He is also the author of books Shaping Globalization, Civil Society, Culture, Cultural Power, and Threefolding. So welcome, Nicanor. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen.
Yes. And
it's good to be with you and all your friends in NetworkM.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe you could start with just telling us a little bit about you and how you got involved in civil society.
Yeah, okay. My involvement in the larger civil society work started when I was 18. And I was in the university at the time. And I felt really that the university education system was not responding to the needs of student life, to the larger, especially the larger questions of society, the meaning of life, the purpose of existence, and all of these key questions. Rather, I felt they were giving us courses in trivia. Mm-hmm. So we organized a student protest, and we eventually led to with massive participation by thousands of students, and it shut down the university for 3 weeks. While we started to have dialogues with the leadership of the university and things like that. That was my first introduction to a kind of movement, and then that graduated into many other movements, involvements in social movements of various kinds, like campaigns against nuclear power, campaign against biotechnology. I was actually in exile in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And one of the places where I worked with was the Foundation on Economic Trends with Jeremy Rifkin. And at that time in 1983, we were raising the issue of genetic engineering. We were the first, in a sense, group doing there to raise that. So I was very involved with that. Then later on, the issue of pesticides, the World Trade Organization. Basically, with that early involvement at age 18 to now for 36 years. Very active in various social movements. Yeah.
And I've heard from you of a moment when that changed. And so you spoke of this moment at university where you started to see something different. And then can you speak of this other moment that's changed your work in a dramatic way?
Yeah. You referring to the university? Or the other moment with the WTO?
With the WTO.
Oh yeah, okay. So that's a very interesting question, because basically my experience has been that when I get engaged in a social movement, maybe what it is, I don't know what it is, but we always succeed. Mm-hmm. So like in the nuclear power, we were able to stop a project wanted to build 12 nuclear power plants in the Philippines. In the pesticides, we managed to ban 32 pesticide formulations and stuff like that. Big projects, small projects. And then wham, came the WTO. And we were basically totally unprepared for it. But also the world of activism. At the height of the debates of the WTO in 1994, there were less than 100 organizations around the world that were actually consciously beginning to understand what the World Trade Organization meant for the different social movements of the world. Because the WTO really was going to erode the achievements of the different social movements on the way. And people didn't understand that. And I didn't. And that was a very big obstacle. And despite how hard I tried to really find out how to deal with it, I spent almost 6 months trying to go over the thick agreements, and I went into a depression. Moments of real uncreativity, not being able to see what can handle this, because it was very powerful and almost hegemonic. Yeah. And then one day, I had an insight into the whole thing, and then immediately put that into action, created a national movement around a policy document in the Philippines, which we thought would basically be a basis for neutralizing the World Trade Organization in the Philippine context. And then I found out that colleagues from other parts of the world were moving in a similar direction. And this was the beginning of the birth of initially what was being called by the press the anti-globalization movement, but which these movements started to call the world justice movement. So there was this period, maybe the key points that one encounters in doing initiatives, this period of not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
But one really should not give up, but should use that as a basis to find deeper ways and deeper understandings of engaging the world, not as a source of discouragement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I see this beautiful drawing here behind us. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. This was the drawing that we used in a recent class, a recent course that I did together with about 20 students in service of the world was the title of the course. And basically there are many possible interpretations of this diagram. One key aspect of this diagram is that it is a diagram of identity formation. The process of forming identities that can change the world. And the journey here starts where there are certain things in the world. The world here is taken in a generic sense. It can be the world of your local community, the world of the nation state, the world of the planet, but can also be the cosmos itself. And that may sound outrageous to talk about the world as cosmos, but we live in an age of science where there are they're rapidly unraveling the mysteries of the universe and what actually that means for life on Earth. So it depends here. If you're here and you have a certain identity here, as you in the world, when the world encounters that identity, you actually at the beginning you don't know what to do with it, and so you undergo a process of what we may call a trial. These kinds of inner processes where you try to deal with what you observe in the world, and you find that basically you're impotent, or you don't know what to do with it, and so you struggle within, and that struggle, some people can fall off, and they go into drugs, they go into antisocial behavior, just alienate themselves because they don't have the inner forces to actually deal with it head on, right? But on the other hand, if you're successful, somehow you find an insight, there is the moment in that process where you encounter the spiritual aspects of yourself and the world in that journey, and that allows you to develop new insights about the situation in the world that gave you that trial. And so you now have the possibility to reframe that reality. And then you come back to the world, and then you're able to transform the world according to that specific problem that brought you to that trial. And it's a never-ending process because then other aspects of the world may emerge, and then you're in a journey again. And in a sense, this might look like a kind of abstract symbol, but this represents a synthesis of many disciplines. For example, social movements theory, for example, or study, the whole scholarship in social movements, they don't talk about it like this. They'll say the activist is concerned with the world, and then they struggle with that vision of the world, let's say the environmental problems of the world, and they deal with that, and then they reframe it. And then with that reframing, they find other people that are actually agree with their reframing or how it can be solved, and they come back and the social movement is launched. That is so basically this understanding of social movements emerged in the 1970s and 80s and 90s. It's called the cultural turn, because most social movements in the past were sort of misunderstood to be political or economic. But in reality, in its essence, social movements are about the creation of a new identity, a reframing of the possibilities of society and of the individual capacity. So this diagram kind of represents that. At the same time, it's also a diagram representing findings in anthropology, history, comparative religion, and all of this, of the path. The classic expression of this is in Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. You know, maybe you're familiar with Joseph Campbell. He was very famous when he was alive in the 80s. The Power of Myth. He had this TV series on the Power of Myth, and it was very well attended in terms of audiences. And the power of his idea, one can glean from a talk given by George Lucas, the guy who did the Star Wars. He gave the eulogy in the 1980s when Joseph Campbell died, and then he told the crowd, made up mostly of Hollywood stars and producers and all of that. He said, "I would not have finished Star Wars without this book by this man called The Power of the Hero with 1,000 Faces." Because basically, that person, Joseph Campbell describes the journey of an individual, how an individual transforms into somebody with capacities to totally engage the world and to see the world differently. That is described in that process. And then, as you know, with all things Hollywood, there was a guy there who listened to that talk, did a 14-page memorandum on the essence of that talk in the book of Joseph Campbell, circulated it, and since that time, for better or for worse, all the blockbusters of Hollywood follow this path.
Wow.
So you will notice the tension, let's say Frodo, but by the way, the Lord of the Rings, by the way, was written by a person, what's his name, Tolkien, who actually understood this process consciously by all his studies of Northern mythologies and European mythologies, and developed the story according to that pattern. So Frodo receives a call, about the ring. He, said, "What does that got to do with me?" And so there's this first thing in that often happens to a person's life. You receive the call so many times, and I don't want it. This is kind of disturb my life. What am I going to do with this? And all of that. That's the call.
And the call coming from the world. What is happening right now?
Yes, exactly. And you actually respond to the call of the world if you have actually deeply affected by something in the world. That means to say you have allowed the world to enter into your soul, into yourself, to be deeply affected by that. Because people don't know, they have an instinctive feeling if they allow that to happen, their world will be different. That's why it's a protection, not to, just to ignore it, to be apathetic, not to listen to the news. And it's a form of self-protection because they know very well the moment they become concerned and it enters into their world, they're going to go to trial. So Frodo then undertakes the trial and all his journeys there and all the successes, failures, and till finally he undergoes a series of trials. He went like this several times. And then he is able to return to the world after destroying the dream of Sauron or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So it has that. It has this. The Hollywood films are consciously created out of this gesture.
Right.
That's a little known fact, but I know this from articles. Right.
You spoke about the call from the world and the trial.
Right.
And then are there two other elements in that?
Oh yeah, this is the illumination stage. In the illumination stage, you see the call produces a wound in the soul. That's why it's a trial. Where there's a kind of very deep wound in oneself that plunges one into a kind of searching about the meaning of what the event was. And then out of that inner struggle, something happens there. And we can go to the details of that. That's going to take a lot of time. Something happens there. The person in that struggle enters into a new level of consciousness, basically a creative form of consciousness. And out of that spiritual space, is able to understand the meaning of the whole process, finds a new identity, a new understanding of himself or herself, returns to the world with certain amounts of powers. Capacities connected to the question. It's not any capacity, but the capacity is attuned to the wound that you allowed yourself to be open to. Then you can know how to deal with it. So this is the specific journey, is the journey of social movements. And there's a wonderful book by a friend, Paul Ray. It's called Cultural Creatives. And the subtitle is How After 50 Million Americans are Changing the World. Because he says that, this guy is very interesting. He spent 20 years interviewing over 100,000 individuals. Statistical sample. It's a very large sample. Usually when you do 5,000, you sort of statistically significant, in the surveys. But he did this for 20 years in interviews that lasted hours to 3 days. So this is a very in-depth interview. And he comes out with some really amazing findings. And his book also contains the story of 20 social movements in the United States. And all of them had this pattern. And he was using the journey of the hero as his framework. And when we met, we didn't know that. He said, "Oh, this is all very familiar." And so, in fact, we started giving workshops together in Germany. Started collaborating a little bit. But his finding was that there are 50 million Americans living today who have this as their background and who have the capacity to actually, in a sense, awaken and change. By the way, since that research was done up to the late 1990s, he has incorporated the social movement of the young people for today, who are now bringing a new element to this. And that for me is the source of importance of the young people today, who are bringing a certain kind of maturity. I don't know, I have my own spiritual understanding of what that means, but it's not a mainstream understanding. But the phenomena is young people today come with capacities that took our generation, 1, 2, 3 decades to develop. This is understood instinctively wherever I'm meeting young people all over the world. And it resonates so strong, and that's already the starting point of young people today, this understanding. Our generation had to synthesize the inner and the outer. If you notice, the 60s was mostly outer, and then the 70s and 80s were mostly inner. And then the 1990s was trying to attempt to synthesize these two. The young people today come with this inherent notion that both have to be synthesized. So for me, that's very significant because, in a sense, the young people wanting to be active in the world today already have in their whole being this what we have to synthesize out of our heart experience. So for me, that points to another level of the spiritual process where people, these young people are incarnating today, are bringing special capacities that are honed and ready to work. So that's what makes this, that's why I'm always looking at what the young people are are doing. On top of that, they're also tech savvy. They're geeks. In a sense. I was shocked. I don't know if you heard, there was a question and answer this afternoon in one session. One of the people from my generation was still questioning the need for computers and for the internet. For me, that's absolutely shocking. Because part of this process means whatever world challenge is there that needs to be met by undergoing the process and experiencing what it is. Because this is a tremendous source of power. And if you don't know what it is, you're going to be very naive about it. That means you're not accepting the call. Yeah. But the young people today have it. They can pick up a technological gadget and they really sort of almost immediately know how it functions. I know that from my son. I don't know where he got his ability. He didn't study computers. He just looks at it and picks it up and he just does it. And I've seen this also with so many young people.
Yeah. So on these questions of technology and these callings from the world, if if we look at what's happening in the world and the global warming and the creation of global monocultures and this intense poverty, and many young people also having a strong desire to do something, but feeling, where do I take the first step? How do I become involved and active? So.
Yeah, I think knowing this as a kind of universal process, because some people might, they might start immediately, they're concerned about poverty, they don't go this way. They immediately jump into action. That was the old way, that was our way, and it didn't work. Because there was no in-depth penetration into the whole thing. And if it did work, invariably people had this kind of process undergoing. I discovered this by accident. I found out in an interview. My friend of mine did an interview with 50 people who had won the Right Livelihood Award, or also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. These were famous global activists. I mean, they've done massive work changing the world in their own setting and globally. I mean,
Which you were also a winner of that.
Yeah, I also was awarded that several years ago. And so the people they interviewed, although it wasn't explicit in their work, all 50 of them had a spiritual practice, which meant this process and different forms of entering into a process. So that is like a kind of, it's important for young people who want to be active, let's say poverty, so first of all, in this phase, to deeply understand that, to how it works, not just the phenomena, the structures that are actually creating it, regenerating it in the world, the ideologies and worldviews that make it happen, and the kinds of consciousness that feed into the worldview, which then feed into the structures and so on. I mean, that's all part of this process of understanding the world, which becomes deepened by this process of, trying to come to grips with that understanding. So let's say poverty, you just don't go out there and start trying to give, you have to understand what are the structures that create poverty. What are the political, economic, and cultural factors that make people poor? Who are the key institutions that bring it about? What are their belief systems that contribute to their behavior? I mean, all of these have to be unraveled there. And this is part, while you're doing that, you're actually moving deeper in this phase, and then you get an illumination. Oh, that is it. Then you can come back and then be engaged in the world. So it's really important to be engaged actively in an area by deeply sensing the realities there. And then also rapidly acting out. Once when you have an insight, one should have the courage also to bring that insight into action and not be paralyzed by what one would see as a lot of work that will be needed to bring it about.
And you were speaking of young people, and what do you see as really what young people can bring into the world now?
Yeah, they can actually bring so many things. It's one thing probably will be in terms of speeding up. The world is a kind of speeding up. One thing that is a kind of talent of your generation, the younger people, is the relationship to technology. They're more comfortable with technology than the older generation. And global civil society is a phenomenon of the age of the internet. Almost all the major organizing takes place via email, websites, long-distance calls via voice-over internet protocol, which are basically free, and all of this. The young people are able to enter into the world much more easily than than our generation. And that is one area, so that's a kind of tool that can actually then be used. So that seems like there's a kind of natural relationship of young people to the technology. And so So if they bring that, and for example, the whole mobilization process of global networks, of which swarming is a very important phenomenon. Swarming is what has replaced centralized modes in social movements. You know, before you had mass action, you had a centralized structure that told people what to do.
Mm-hmm.
In the present generation, you have affinity groups, decentralized, polycentric leadership. They have their own leadership, they have their own protocols. They come together on the basis of a substance of an issue, and they remain decentralized. And that coming together is what gives people in power, you know, the goosebumps, because it's called swarming. And the analogy is like the bees, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you touch a bee colony, and then you run away. You might, in swapping the bees, you might start killing the bees, but one of them will really sting you. There are thousands. So leaderless networks, in a sense, is another skill that was displayed by your generation, very easily in the Battle of Seattle and elsewhere. In fact, it was so effective that the US Department of Defense had to commission in-depth studies on the nature of networks. That is something new that was brought about by the younger generation who were more tech-savvy. And it was funny reading this US Department of Defense. There's this popularization of that's called networks and net wars. And by the way, the Zapatista movement in Mexico is consciously using network as a form of achieving its goals. But what was very interesting was that the Department of Defense was having a hard time distinguishing between an Al-Qaeda network and a civil society network. Because the network principles were the same.
Right.
So, you know, polycentric, I mean, decentralized leadership, sharing a common ideal, but no one, you know, telling who to do what. So the problem they had in the Battle of Seattle, and this was really very clear, was that they may try to neutralize one leader, but it doesn't stop the whole thing. It's not a game of chess anymore, where the key is to capture the king. In chess, you capture the king, and the game is finished. Rather, it's the game of Go. It's a Chinese and Japanese game, where it is a war of positions, where it's a network occupying a certain space, and it's a crazy game if you're used to chess, because, you know, when you think you've got it, just a very slight reconfiguration, and then you're inside, trapped into a whole formation. So it's a war of position and strategic placement, and it's a very different game, the network. And so these things became very heavy-duty discussions in the last many years. You know, from the Battle of Seattle to the Battle of Cancun. Basically, both battles neutralizing the WTO. And governments which are hierarchical, centralized, had a hard time responding into this fast, agile network. In fact, there is an ongoing study in the US Department of Defense on this network character of civil society. But finally, they began to distinguish between Al-Qaeda and civil society.
Good.
Yeah, that's important.
Yes.
So this is partly the result of this technological savvy of the younger generation, and out of that had created a new social form, you know, which is quite different from the old mobilizations.
Right.
And you know, one thing that's very interesting there, there is the movement, the moving, for example, say an issue of, let's say, debt, Jubilee, the Jubilee 2000. It's a global movement, very large. Different networks of organizations were in the center of that because they had the information, they were working. But in the WTO, they were in the periphery. Because there was another set of organizations, a network that had the facts and the data. And then in poverty, still another set. So in this new network configuration, what you had were You may be in the center, depending on the issue, but you will be a periphery, supportive role. And that's what's been happening, very fluid, depending on issue per issue. This is all a product of this internet generation. It's totally impossible without the communications.
And it seems as though also you have the opportunity to, from your local projects and initiatives, to, through the network, also create on a global level.
No, absolutely. So today, if, you know, and this is the other characteristic connected with this, the global commons, or the global consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, these groups of civil society organizations around the world, they don't vote, right? You don't vote on representation. If say they see something is excellent, then you all swarm to your site, and you become the de facto thought leader for that thing. Depending if your initiative is cool or really savvy or innovative, it's just changing. This changing landscape, and there is a characterization, an inbuilt criteria of what is excellent. So you will see this continual dynamics. One day it's this site, and then maybe for a few years it lost its dynamism, and another becomes a site where a lot of tens of thousands are visiting. It's a kind of universe where the best ideas and the best innovations immediately get recognition and are leveraged beyond the scale, the original scale, rapidly in the age of the internet.
Great. Well, thank you, Nicanor, and we'll have a lot to chew on in our discussions.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, NetworkM is based on that principle.
Yes, for
so,
sure.
Right. Yeah, good luck and all the best to your efforts.
Yes.
Exciting. Yeah.